The White House press briefing room buzzed with restless energy. It was the first press conference since President Donald J. Trump had shocked the world by announcing a historic 245% tariff on Chinese imports. While Wall Street reeled and international markets panicked, supporters of the president stood strong behind what they called the biggest America First trade maneuver in history. At the podium, Karoline Leavitt, young, composed, and fierce, adjusted the mic. She was no stranger to heat, especially from the ever-critical mainstream media. At just 30, Karoline had already become a force in Washington, known for her unapologetic defense of conservative values and, more importantly, of President Trump's second-term policies. Reporters shuffled in their seats as cameras focused on her. But there was one face in particular that Karoline had her eye on: Samantha Reed, a fiery liberal reporter from Progressive Voice Network, notorious for her biting critiques of the Trump administration. Karoline opened with a firm but professional tone. "Good afternoon. Today, I'll be addressing questions regarding President Trump's new tariff package targeting the Chinese Communist Party's economic aggression. The president's 245% tariff is not a declaration of war. It's a declaration of independence." Samantha Reed shot her hand up immediately. Karoline, without hesitation, nodded. "Go ahead, Samantha." "Karoline, the entire global economy is bracing for impact," Samantha began, her voice laced with condescension. "Trade experts, economists, and even former Republican officials are warning that these tariffs could lead to inflation, job losses, and a total breakdown in diplomatic relations. Can you explain to the American people how a 245% tariff possibly helps anyone, let alone working families who are already struggling?" There it was, the classic doomsday script. Karoline knew it by heart. She leaned into the mic, a slight smirk appearing. "Great question, Samantha. I appreciate your concern for working families. So let's break this down, not with talking points, but with cold, hard truth." She paced slightly, pausing for effect. "First, these tariffs are not about punishment. They're about strategy. For decades, China has exploited weak American leadership, ripping off our intellectual property, manipulating their currency, and flooding our markets with cheap, substandard goods. And who paid the price? American workers, American manufacturers. Small towns hollowed out by foreign competition. Cameras clicked furiously. Samantha tried to interject, but Karoline raised a finger. "Second, these tariffs are an investment in long-term American strength. Yes, there may be short-term adjustments, but for the first time in modern history, we're giving American industries the chance to compete fairly. Already, we're seeing domestic steel mills restart. New semiconductor plants are being planned in Texas, Arizona, and Ohio. That's not fear, that's progress." Karoline's voice sharpened. "This isn't just about economics. It's about sovereignty. Do we want our military tech relying on Chinese microchips? Are antibiotics manufactured in Wuhan? Or our children's future leveraged by a communist regime that doesn't play by the rules?" The room fell quiet. Samantha blinked, stunned by the rapid-fire logic. Karoline leaned back slightly, her tone softer. "President Trump's vision isn't isolationist. It's protective. He's drawing a line, making it clear. If you want access to the greatest consumer market in the world, the United States of America, you'll play fair. Or you'll pay the price." As murmurs rippled across the room, Samantha opened her mouth again. "But tariffs hit American consumers. How can you say this helps the average family?" Karoline chuckled lightly. "Funny you should ask that, because I've got the numbers, and I'll gladly walk you through them." Karoline turned slightly and gestured toward a chart that had been placed beside the podium earlier. It displayed a bold title: "Tariffs and American Resurgence. The Real Story." "Let's clear the air," she said, tapping the pointer against the board. "One of the biggest myths being pushed by the liberal media is that tariffs are just taxes on consumers. That's a dangerously simplistic view." She turned to the room, eyes narrowing on Samantha Reed, who was now flipping through her notes with increasing urgency. "In the first quarter alone since the tariffs were announced and partially implemented," Karoline continued, "we've already seen a 28% uptick in domestic manufacturing orders. Why? Because when foreign goods cost more, American businesses look home. That means more jobs here, real jobs, not speculative stock gains in Beijing. Reporters typed furiously. Some glanced around, clearly surprised by the specificity. Take Ohio, Karoline added, where a shuttered textile factory reopened last month. You know what the owner said? We finally have a shot again. For years, we were being undercut by foreign labor that paid pennies on the dollar. Now we can breathe. That's not just good policy. It's economic justice. Samantha interjected sharply. But what about price hikes, Karoline? What do you say to a single mom who's now paying more for basic appliances or electronics because of these tariffs? Karoline turned back calmly, ready for the punch. I say this, the slight increase in prices is an investment, a down payment on American independence. And the reality? So far, the impact has been minimal. Most companies have absorbed the costs or pivoted to domestic suppliers. She stepped closer, passion flaring. But more importantly, Samantha, do you think that single mom wants her job outsourced to a Chinese plant where there are no labor rights, no EPA standards, and no accountability? Or does she want a stable American economy where her kids can grow up working in thriving industries that we control? The room went still. For once, even the reporters from CNN and MSNBC didn't have a quick retort. Karoline continued, We're done being the world's piggy bank. President Trump's tariffs are the first real pushback China's felt in decades. And they're feeling it. Their economy is slowing. Their exports to the US are dropping while American production rises. That's leverage, and we're using it to negotiate from a position of strength. A Fox News correspondent raised his hand, clearly intrigued. Karoline, are you saying that this will reshape the global economic structure? Karoline smiled. That's exactly what I'm saying. For too long, the US has played by globalist rules written to keep us dependent. But with these tariffs, we're turning the page. We're not isolating, we're recalibrating. It's about putting American workers first, American innovation first, and American families first. Samantha tried again, almost desperately now. But the international community is furious. The EU, Canada, even Australia are cautioning against escalation. Isn't the administration concerned about a full-blown trade war? Karoline didn't blink. We've been in a trade war, Samantha. We just never fought back. For 30 years, they've been dumping, stealing, and dominating. We're finally standing up. And if the international community is upset that America is acting in its own interest, that says more about them than us. A burst of applause echoed from the back of the room. Staffers, interns, and even some members of the press who couldn't hide their approval. Karoline nodded confidently. If the cost of protecting our future is making a few global bureaucrats uncomfortable, then I'd say we're on the right path. The cameras captured it all. The unwavering stance, the facts, the conviction. This wasn't just another press briefing. It was a moment. By the time Karoline Leavitt moved to the next slide of her presentation, the press room had transformed. What started as an ambush quickly became a lecture in economic patriotism. She wasn't just answering questions. She was commanding the room. This next chart, she said, pointing to a graphic titled Pre-Tariff Dependency versus Post-Tariff Resurgence, shows just how dependent we've become on China over the past 20 years. Everything from basic pharmaceuticals to rare earth elements, we were asleep at the wheel. She turned back toward Samantha. What President Trump has done is issue a national wake-up call. We can't afford to outsource our sovereignty. These tariffs are a message. If you want to play in our market, you bring value, you bring fairness, and you bring respect. A reporter from NBC tried to break through. But what about the farmers? They're seeing Chinese retaliation. Some of them are worried. Karoline nodded. I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, Beijing has tried to retaliate, targeting our agricultural sector. But President Trump anticipated that. That's why he's implemented strategic subsidies and relief programs to support our farmers during this transition period. She tapped another chart. And guess what? American agricultural exports to other nations like India, Brazil, and even Eastern Europe are already picking up. Our farmers are tough. They understand what's at stake. And they know they're not being sacrificed, they're being empowered. Samantha crossed her arms, clearly dissatisfied. You make it sound like this is all going according to plan. But critics say these tariffs could isolate us, reduce foreign investment, and ultimately hurt the middle class. Karoline's expression didn't waver. She tapped another chart. And guess what? American agricultural exports to other nations like India, Brazil, and even Eastern Europe are already picking up. Our farmers are tough. They understand what's at stake. And they know they're not being sacrificed, they're being empowered. Samantha crossed her arms, clearly dissatisfied. You make it sound like this is all going according to plan. But critics say these tariffs could isolate us, reduce foreign investment, and ultimately hurt the middle class. Karoline's expression didn't waver. I'm going to say something bold here. Samantha, the middle class is already hurting because of the decades of failed policies your media pals cheered on. We let China join the WTO. We signed lopsided trade deals. We watched factories close, towns collapse, and drug abuse skyrocket in once thriving communities. And no one in your newsroom blinked. Her voice rose slightly now, emotion seeping in. Where was your outrage when Ohio lost 30% of its manufacturing base? When Detroit filed for bankruptcy? When America became a service economy that served everyone but its own people? A hushed silence swept the room. Even Samantha looked rattled. Karoline pressed on, pointing toward the final chart. Tariffs are not the enemy. Complacency is. Globalism isn't free trade, it's a rigged game. And under this administration, we're flipping the board. One of the younger reporters from a local affiliate in the Midwest stood up nervously. Karoline, how do you respond to younger voters, millennials and Gen Z, who've been told free trade equals progress? Karoline smiled, her tone softening. I get it. They grew up in a world where cheap smartphones and fast shipping seemed like magic. But behind every cheap gadget is a cost, usually paid by a laid-off American, a gutted community, or a national security risk. She stepped away from the podium, walking slowly. We're not saying no to trade. We're saying yes to smart trade. Trade that lifts up American workers. Trade that protects our resources, strengthens our infrastructure, and keeps our enemies in check. That's not regression. That's real progress. The mood in the room had shifted entirely. Journalists looked less like interrogators and more like students. Some of them, perhaps, hearing this case laid out clearly for the first time. And let me add one more thing, Karoline said, her voice now calm but commanding. President Trump doesn't want a trade war. He wants a fair deal. If China reforms, respects our IP, stops subsidizing slave labor factories, we'll talk. But if not, we're ready. We're America, and we don't bluff. For a long moment, there was silence, no shouted questions, no sarcastic remarks. Just the clicking of cameras, capturing what would soon become the most shared moment on every cable network and social media platform in the country. Karoline had done more than defend policy. She'd redefined it. Within hours of Karoline Leavitt's showdown with the press, clips from the briefing exploded across social media. The hashtags #KarolineClapsBack, #TariffTruth, and #AmericaFirstEconomy trended on X, formerly Twitter, Rumble, and Truth Social. Even traditionally liberal platforms like YouTube and TikTok saw a tidal wave of reaction videos, debates, and commentary flooding in from all sides of the aisle. One viral post on X read, Karoline Leavitt just dropped an economic masterclass and destroyed the leftist narrative in under 20 minutes. This is why she's press secretary. This is why we stand with Trump. Cable news scrambled to respond. On Fox News, primetime host Jesse Waters opened his segment saying, that was not just a press conference. That was a rebranding of the entire trade war narrative. Karoline didn't just answer questions. She body-slammed the globalist argument with facts, numbers, and backbone. Even CNN, although predictably critical, begrudgingly admitted on air that Leavitt's presentation was well-prepared, sharp, and difficult to counter in real time. Meanwhile, at the White House, President Trump was watching live from the Oval Office alongside Vice President J.D. Vance, arms crossed, smiling. That's my girl, Trump muttered with pride. She's got more guts than the entire Bush family combined. Back in the press room, Samantha Reed sat behind her laptop, lips pressed tightly, fingers still trembling slightly from the exchange. Her editors were already texting her to respond. Write a rebuttal, post a statement, say something. But deep down, Samantha knew she had walked into a battlefield unarmed. Karoline, back in her office moments after the briefing, was calm and composed. An aide rushed in, phone in hand. "Karoline, you have to see this. Jim Cramer from CNBC just said the tariffs might actually work if this administration keeps the pressure up." She raised an eyebrow. "Cramer? The guy who cheered offshoring for 2 decades?" The aide laughed. "Yup," he said, and I quote, "This administration might have just outmaneuvered China at their own game." Karoline leaned back, a slow smile spreading. About time they figured it out. Across the country, the reaction wasn't just online. In small towns in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan, people watched the exchange in diners, barbershops, and living rooms. For them, Karoline's words weren't abstract. They were real. In Akron, a steelworker named Brian Rodriguez turned to his co-workers during a break. "You hear her? She's the first person in Washington to say what we've been screaming for 20 years. We've been sold out. Not anymore." In Kansas City, a mother of 2 working at a local appliance store nodded along as Karoline spoke on the break room TV. "I'll pay a few extra bucks for a fridge if I know it's made by my neighbor. That's not a burden, that's loyalty." And in Silicon Valley, even a few rogue venture capitalists started quietly whispering to each other, "If she's right, we might be looking at a reshuffling of the entire supply chain. That's not just politics. That's opportunity." Back in Washington, Samantha Reed finally posted her follow-up article. But instead of her usual fiery tone, her headline read, "Karoline Leavitt lays out case for Trump tariffs and leaves critics on the defensive." It wasn't praise, but it wasn't the hit piece her network expected either. For the first time in her career, Samantha felt a flicker of doubt, not in her ideology, but in whether she'd actually ever understood the people outside the Beltway bubble. Meanwhile, Karoline reviewed an email from Trump's senior staff. "Keep it up. We want you front and center. Every network, every mic. This is our moment." Karoline cracked her knuckles, eyes locked on the screen. She wasn't just defending policy. She was shaping the future of economic nationalism, and Americans were finally listening. 3 days after the explosive press conference, Karoline Leavitt found herself standing at the podium once again. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Gone was the combative energy that had previously defined the press room. There was a quiet tension, like a courtroom awaiting a final verdict. Even Samantha Reed, seated front row again, looked more prepared to listen than spar. Karoline adjusted the microphone, her tone measured but resolute. "We're not just in a trade war," she began. "We're in a war for the future of American self-determination. And finally, we're winning." She paused, scanning the room. In the past 72 hours alone, China has backpedaled on its retaliatory stance. They've issued a public statement indicating their willingness to renegotiate on intellectual property enforcement. Why? Because they know we mean business now. The reporters perked up. "Don't be mistaken, this isn't about economic bullying. It's about accountability." For too long, the Chinese Communist Party used backdoor subsidies, stolen tech, and manipulative currency tactics to strangle American innovation. We let them. Until now. She clicked a remote and a graph appeared, one showing a steady incline of US-based manufacturing investment over the past 6 months. The crowd murmured. Over 200 new factories have been registered for construction permits in America since the tariff announcement. That's over 75,000 projected jobs. And it's not just blue-collar work. It's aerospace, semiconductors, green tech, and AI development. We're not returning to the past. We're building the future. Samantha finally raised her hand, not with defiance but curiosity. "Karoline, what would you say to those who argue these are short-term gains, and that China will simply wait until the administration changes in 2028 to go back to business as usual?" Karoline leaned forward slightly, her voice now low and deliberate. "I'd say, they've miscalculated. Again," she continued, "because this isn't just Trump's policy anymore. This is the American people waking up. From Maine to Montana, folks aren't asking for a return to cheap goods. They're asking for respect. They're demanding leadership that values American workers over international approval. Karoline's phone vibrated slightly on the podium. She glanced briefly and smiled. It was a notification from Reuters. Consumer confidence hits 20-year high following manufacturing boom. She placed the phone down and looked into the sea of lenses and eyes. This administration understands that national strength is economic strength, and that tariffs aren't walls, they're leverage, tools of negotiation. And now that China knows we'll use them, they no longer get to write the rules. She took a breath, letting the weight of her words settle. And let me say something directly to the American people watching this today. If you lost your job to outsourcing, if your town was gutted by unfair trade deals, if your parents had to choose between dignity and survival, this moment is for you. We are not going back. We are building forward. And we will do it with American hands, American minds, and American pride. Cameras flashed as the room stood silent for several seconds. Then, slowly, it happened. A single clap. Then two. Then the entire back row, typically reserved for junior reporters and regional affiliates, stood up in applause. Not because they were told to, but because something about what she said clicked. She had captured the soul of a movement. Later that evening, President Trump addressed the nation from the Oval Office. Flanked by an American flag and a glowing portrait of President Reagan, he leaned into the camera. "My fellow Americans," he said, "we are finally fighting back. We are no longer the fools of the world. Thanks to our trade team and the incredible Karoline Leavitt, we are witnessing a rebirth of American industry." He paused. This isn't just tariffs. This is history. Across the country, TV screens, radios, and live streams carried his voice. And in homes large and small, hearts beat a little faster. The message was clear. America had drawn a line. And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't apologizing for standing on the right side of it.